Thanks, everybody, and welcome to the October edition of the Cloud Office Hours as part of the You Already Own It program. My name is Bob Ballard. I'm the Principal Cloud Strategist at Planet Technologies. Um, on the call today, we also have Jerry Martin, who's a key member of your You Already Own It team. He's an engagement manager for Planet, and leading the demo today, we are pleased to have Matt Nevins, who is our senior cloud architect for Planet Technologies. So roughly 30 minutes for the overview and demo. It might be a few minutes longer than that. There's a lot of good stuff to cover. And then we will open the mic for obviously questions on the specific topic today. But of course, as we always welcome topics in general about issues, concerns, around Office 365 in general. We have a great team on the phone with Matt and Jerry and I today that can talk about other topics as well. We also have Colin as well from Planet On, so we're happy to answer any of the questions with the brain trust here. So your You Already Own It team is myself, Jerry Martin, Mary Tucker handles administration, as well as Steve Winter, our Vice President of East Region and State and Local Government. So a couple things. First, don't forget, right, that you can email questions, concerns, issues you have at any time to the You Already Own It at goplanet.com alias. That's available for all You Already Own It customers of Planet Technologies. We'd like this not to be emergency break fix situations. I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone here. Emergency break fix situations, obviously there are other channels for that, but if you have questions, concerns about enabling any of the technologies, features, what these things mean, new announcements from Microsoft, the team is happy to help you out. We'll certainly give you a reply back within 24 hours. It may be that we're researching the question that you have, but our aim is to at least return the contact within 24 hours of getting the email. So this month's topic is Azure Information Protection. It was something that's come up with a lot of customers, and it's sort of very much an exciting and evolving piece of the Office 365 platform. So I thought I'd start off with, just thinking about how we think about securing data to start things off. And again, I'm going to try to go through the slides pretty quickly. This deck is attached to this, so you can go in and download the deck if you want. I also will send it out to everyone afterwards if that's easier for you. This first slide talks to sort of a story that I like to tell when I talk about security and security concepts to most customers, right? So when we think about security classically in IT, right, we're talking about securing the premises, right? And for years and years and years, that was a great story. But much like sort of the evolution of security when it comes to cities, an example that I always use is once upon a time, right, the way that we secured cities was by making them around castles and building a wall around them, right? And that was a great solution to keeping people out that we didn't want. We had a single location where we could look at who was coming in and try to guard them. And that worked fantastically until the catapult and the siege ladder was invented, right? So suddenly this thing that secured cities didn't work anymore. And that's sort of where we are with IT, right? So then the next step we start looking at, in the Microsoft terminology, right? These are security technologies that come with EM plus S. That's managing your mobile environment and sort of, things adjacent to your perimeter. And again, that offers this significant level of improved security around that. But again, now we're securing the data in its location. We're securing devices that access it. But still, we're not securing the data itself. Right. So, and what I mean by that is, the analogy I like to use for this is the filing cabinet, right? So filing cabinets can have, we've seen these high tech, in the day, the heavy duty filing cabinets with combination locks or key locks and all the drawers lock, and and that was your security. But once I removed the file out of the filing cabinet, there's no security on it, right? So when we start thinking about information protection, Azure Information Protection, we start saying, okay, this data can be in Office 365, it may be actually on premises, and it certainly can be out in the world somewhere, wherever that might be, through intentional means or even accidental means, right? So how do we make sure our most sensitive content is secured, logged, tracked, audited, all of those things? So these concepts have been around for Microsoft for a while, right? So I don't want to pretend, most people know these as rights management service, Azure rights management service. This concept has been around, and it's focused primarily on the protection side of things, right? So that's take these, have users sort of identify data as important, and then encrypt it, provide some additional access control and some basic policy enforcement around it, right? And that's sort of where Microsoft's lived in this space up until very recently. With the advent of Azure Information Protection on the back end, right, we can add some additional capabilities, right? We can start tracking these documents, who accessed them, where were they, and maybe make different conditional rules based on that. So example, I'll let Matt Nevins access this document from his desktop within my network, but I won't let Matt Nevins access this document when he's outside my network, right? And then also the ability to revoke this document. So suddenly, I have concerns that, Matt Nevins is no longer on this team. He was a consultant. We've shared things with him. I need to revoke his access. So one of the problems that we talk about all the time, right, is what about data that's not in my controlled environment? I was working from home. Somebody emailed me a document. I saved that document to my desktop. Through whatever reason, I was let go today, right? So I can revoke their access to network resources in Office 365 and all of those things. But how do I revoke access to sensitive content no matter where they may have stored it? And the other part, which I think is particularly exciting for my customers and a big piece of sort of a lot of the improvements in Azure Information Protection, is around the classification and labeling of content, right? So whether that is automatic or manual, the ability to actually, label content and have those labels be relevant and stay with the document, whether I'm on premises or in the cloud or outside the environment, and all, regardless of its location, those labels stay forward. And we're gonna demo some of this stuff so you'll have a better understanding of what that is. So I'm just going to do a couple of slides to sort of frame out some of the main concepts here. And obviously, if you have any questions, feel free. You can you can type them along the way, and if we can answer them or it makes sense to answer them, maybe Matt or Colin or one of those folks can reply it. Or otherwise, obviously, we can save them till the end and you can ask them. So a big part of this is classifying the data, because the idea that all data has the same level of sensitivity is ludicrous, right? So one of the things we want to be really careful about when we sort of implement any of these new technologies is that we don't make interacting with the data so hard that people find ways to circumvent the system, right? So what we want to do is say, classify data to say this data is personal, this data is, public, it doesn't matter, we don't need additional rules around it, this is internal only, restricted, confidential. We're going to talk a little bit more in the demo about what those classifications mean and some best practices for doing this smartly. But we also say is, hey, let's take action and start with saying classifying some of the most sensitive data. We can set automatic rules, and this is exciting new capabilities that I think can interest a lot of customers. And then we can associate actions so that we can make things very visual to the end user, that this data has been labeled sensitive. We can take and do other restrictions as to where it can be placed and how it can be stored and whether it's encrypted, or we take additional protections based on that tagging and classification. So and then within the classification, we can also apply labels, right? So one of the things that's really complicated concept, right, is that, hey, I want to create a whole bunch of crazy rules, and I want to have 30 labels, right? And, have them by department. And, when you're in a department, so one that comes up all the time is the idea of an HR department, for instance, right? So documents that are considered sensitive to HR maybe should only be reviewable by HR, things like that. So the way that Azure Information Protection looks at this is that we can also say this document is confidential, but we can label it. In this case, it says finance, but it could be HR. We can add a label to it that says HR, and then based on that label, we can take additional protections, right? And by the way, this stuff is stamped in the metadata in clear text. And Microsoft's working, pretty tightly with a number of other DLP vendors. So not only can the Microsoft solution take care of this, but if you have DLP vendors that you're using on premise, they can also take advantage of this labeling as well, right? And that these labels travel with the documents regardless of their location. So, and then we can use these things to then protect the data. Based on what its label and its classification is. So I can say, hey, this user can view and edit, but they can't copy and paste. I can encrypt the data. I can create an additional authentication and permissioning required to validate continuously that you're still a valid user on the network to access the data, even if the data is not stored on my network. So, a couple of things. So, so a lot of things that come up is, hey, I can leverage this service whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. So obviously, if this content is in Office 365, right, the content is out there in the cloud now. But if the rights management service itself, the actual Azure Information Protection Service, doesn't look at the data at all, right? It actually, looks at the classification, and the label, applies the rule set. If it requires to encrypt the document, the applications themselves adhere to the rules and restrictions based on that. So obviously, all the Microsoft Office applications, are integrated with this. But we're also starting to see a number of third-party applications integrate with this as well. So this is another particularly exciting part, right? So this enables some of the concepts that are built in EM plus S, in the Azure Active Directory Premium to leverage things like conditional access rules to apply in this scenario as well, right? So it can say, I can look at a document, I can monitor and say, Bob's accessing this from inside the network or in North America. Jane's accessing it from some other location. Joe's trying to access this from the Ukraine. That's not allowed in my environment. So again, we can start talking about rules like, hey, am I inside or outside the network? Is there ever a reason for sensitive HR documents or, things that have, other compliance regulations like CGIS or whatever? Do I want to set rules to say no one outside these particular geographic boundaries or my network boundaries should be able to access these documents? So the idea behind this is I can safely share this document with all of these conditions in a variety of situations, right? So whether it's content in OneDrive or SharePoint, whether it's an email, PDF documents actually are participating. Adobe's participating in integrating with this solution as well. And as well as, we're starting to see some other line of business systems also participate in this. So I'm accessing a drive on OneDrive. I can share it with Bob, who's allowed to view and print it, but only internally. I can share it with Jane. She's an external partner. We've allowed her to both edit and print the document, and she's allowed to access from anywhere because we know she's an external partner. So I can apply different rules in how I share these documents with different people, and that can be very, very powerful. So what's the topology look like for this, right? And that's an important part, and some of this depends on So obviously, whether I'm trying to restrict on-premises documents and participate in the same way, that's one of the big benefits by leveraging the solution, through your various subscriptions, whether it's Azure Information Protection standalone. We'll talk about the licensing in a second. Or as well as through things like E3 and E5, right, and those capabilities. So I'm going to break down that in a second. But let's just assume we want this fully integrated environment. So, I have Azure AD Connect that's already in place today. We're synchronizing with Azure AD Premium and Office 365 in many of our cases. I have the Azure Rights Management Service running in the cloud. And then I even, depending on which plan I have the ability to bring my own key, right? So not only, I can leverage the Microsoft key infrastructure, right? But if I want an additional layer and somebody comes to me and says, this particular content, I don't even want Microsoft to be managing and running the key. I'm going to generate my own key and send it up to the Azure Key Management solution. There's an RMS connector that gets connected down to your own environment, which then can trigger actions and activities based on these same classifications and labels that I have, even if it's sitting on a file share in my own infrastructure, right? And I can leverage some of the built-in capabilities and classification services that we see built into Windows 10, and all of this carries through, so that even if this document was created and stored on my desktop, I can pick up these labels and classifications, and if I go to email them, the email server will automatically see that the label and classification's been set, and triggers can happen. So just, in a couple, how do we get started, and what are a couple of the key steps, right? So when I talk to customers, the first thing I start is, hey, let's start thinking about how we would classify things. Let's get a strategy for that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that during the demo, because I think it helps to see it while Matt's demoing. I'm going to talk about that. But what are we going to create as classifications, and what special labels are we going to make, whether they're departmental driven or other compliance needs, right? And then start thinking about, how do I automate some actions based on these classifications and levels, right? And then on the particularly sensitive data, right, do we apply additional protection, like encrypting and enforcing additional authentication and enforce use rights, right? I can or can't print it, I can copy it, I could paste it, whatever those might be. And then another key point here is then we can sort of look at reporting and say, what's happening to these documents, right? Who is accessing them? From where are they accessing? And do we have any anomalies we want to look at? How many people are accessing sensitive documents from home? Is that a practice we want want to have a conversation about? Is that expected or unexpected? And what actions might we want to take based on that? And then take these documents and collaborate on them securely, even with folks that are not in your infrastructure. And I think that's the biggest piece, right? So we talk a lot about sort of OneDrive governance and SharePoint governance around whether we enable or disable external sharing. Well, one of the things we can do in examples where we've made decisions, a lot of you that have been on my talks before, right, have seen that, I've brought up the concept of the big red lever before, right? And that's, trying not to turn off entire pieces of functionality and instead trying to protect things, at the information level or the user level or the specific use case level, as opposed to broadly saying I can't do things. But how we think about this may change, right? So right now your governance policy might be, we don't allow external sharing in OneDrive at all. But if I enable Azure Information Protection and I apply classifications and I do some automation around this, do I start to say, I will allow people to do external sharing because I know that if the document meets certain criteria, I'm protecting it additionally and I'm getting these additional protections in place, and I can ensure that not only my organization is following standards for compliance, but these third-party people we want to share also have them, whether they have the infrastructure to support it or not, right? And I think that that's an important piece. We're now saying this document is protected wherever it goes, even on someone else's network. So I don't want to get into going down a rundown of each of all the functions and features. So just know, there's a free rights management service available on a personal level. That's really not what we're talking about today. It's missing a lot of the features that you guys would expect, right? There's rights management service that's built into Office 365. Most of the folks on this call have, E3 for government, often called G3, right, or higher, and so you have access to these capabilities there. Where we start to talk about the more interesting additional capabilities that are introduced with Azure Information Protection, right? A couple of key ones step up. So the classification and consumption of these classified documents, that starts at sort of it's sort of the E3 level plus, right? So that starts there, E3 plus EMS. And then when we start layering into the two main things to think about, what goes beyond that is the automation of classification, and the ability to bring your own key starts at E5, right? And so those capabilities start there. And if we look at sort of how there's a few additional ones as well. Obviously, until I get to EMS, I don't get the RMS connector to connect to things on premises as well, right? So that starts there. So the big thing to talk about, and these are just retail prices, by the way, but I like to talk about, I can buy this standalone, right? So if you come to me and say, Bob, I'm really interested in this capability, but we don't have all of these capabilities. So we're in E3. We have SPE3, right? Now it's called M365 E3, and so we have that, and we want these additional capabilities, and we don't need all the other capabilities of E5. I can buy this standalone and add on, right? Or by the way, if I own SPE3 or M365 E3 as it's now called, or if I own SPE5 or M365 E5, these capabilities are just built in and I already have access to them. So I can add it on to the plans that I have, or I can buy the all-inclusive plans to get all of the capabilities. So I'm going to turn it over now for Matt to do a demo. And I think this will probably sort of paint the picture. So Matt, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Great, thanks, Bob. So I'm going to take over the screen sharing here. Give me just 1 second. Find the right window. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually walk through kind of the admin side of the product, and so really this kind of focuses on setting the expectations of what we might see in the demo.
Hey Matt, can you share your screen again? Here it goes. It's loading now. Okay, it was taking a minute to come up.
Okay, so we're going to start with taking a look at the admin side of the product, really just outlining kind of what we expect to see in the demo that we're going to be doing, and then we'll go ahead and dive into a couple different things. There's a lot, as Bob mentioned, to this Azure Information Protection product. We're just going to really scratch the surface this afternoon. So if there's additional things that we can kind of talk about or discuss, more than happy to after we get done through the demo content. So AIP, I'll say AIP because it's a little bit quicker off the tongue. AIP is accessed and administered through the Azure portal. So if you aren't familiar, if you're an Office 365 customer, which I think all of you are, of course, you also have access to the Azure portal as well, which is the portal.azure.com URL. And even if you don't subscribe to anything Azure related, you still get access to a couple of things like the AD interface, as well as things like Security Center, some monitoring, logging, auditing, etc. And AIP is just another what we call blade in that interface. So I've gone ahead and pulled that up here, and really what we're going to see is the interface is really divided into two different things here. We have this thing called this notion of a global policy. And a global policy within AIP is basically kind of the, think of it as the default domain policy of AIP. So just like we really don't typically make modifications to the default domain policy, we really just kind of leave the global policy as is. As Bob described, Microsoft put a lot of research and development into figuring out what the best use case is here for things like these labels, for example. And we want to try to keep it as simple as possible, but we also have the ability then to dive deeper down into scoping additional policies. So within this interface here, again, we can see here, of course, we got a name and how to scope. We got the global policy scope to everybody in the organization. And then we've got this concept of labels, what type of labels they are, et cetera. We also see some nested labels as well. In this case, we've got some different confidential and highly confidential labels, and we'll talk about that momentarily. We also see some additional settings here. A couple things to highlight. One is this setting that says all documents and emails must have a label. This is an interesting setting. It is pretty impactful, right? So if you think about this, this means that every piece of content that's created is going to either automatically get a label or a user will be forced to choose a label. And I'll show you what that interface looks like here in just a few minutes. We can also choose a default label to automatically apply. Now that could be something as low as general, and then we'll kind of dive deep into what those things mean. We have some other things like override information as well as automatic detection and applying of labels as well. So I want to go over to a scoped policy here. I've gone ahead and created a scope policy ahead of time here for something called Project Vulcan. And this is a great example of what a scope policy might come into play for, right? So your organization's got, again, as Bob mentioned, a specific department, or in this case, a specific project that really needs to have its own set of labels and apply those to a certain subset of users. This is where a specific scoped policy would come into play. So we open this up here, and the first thing you notice here once this opens up is that this is actually scoped now to a group that I've created in Azure AD called Project Falcon. And Project Falcon, I think, has 4 or 5 users in it, and those are users working on this project. Our labels are loading here, so we'll get that just a second, but we can jump down and see we've got some additional settings here. Again, the same ones we saw before, but they're a little bit tweaked a little bit differently. In this case, I don't have that the automatic or the all documents must have a label setting enabled. If I do, again, we'll see the interface in a second. For scope policies, this may come into play a little more appropriately, but for this demo, we'll go ahead and leave it off. And we can see the other settings here as well. So let's give it a second for these labels to load. It's been a little, just refresh this.
This is a good time to point out, because I think it's really important. One of the there's some great videos that are out there, and one that really resonated with me around picking of labels and classifications is you should really, really focus on the keep it simple, stupid policy, right? The KISS policy. And that is, try to minimize the amount of labels and try to use culturally relevant terminology for your organization, right? So one of the reasons why, so we mentioned that, you saw some of the global labels that Microsoft had, and they were personal and general, and they used confidential and highly confidential as opposed to sensitive and confidential, right? So there's a lot of industry vernacular out there in the classification world that talks about sensitive data. The problem is that end users don't know the difference between confidential and sensitive. So try to put thought in keeping culturally relevant tags that they can easily understand. I know as an end user, I don't know exactly what confidential means, but I know highly confidential is more than confidential, right? And that's really what we want to get at. All right, go ahead, Matt. Looks like you're adding a label here.
Yes. Yeah, so the labels listed isn't loading for some reason. I've seen this a little bit today. So let let's jump over into what the actual label interface looks like. So we can add additional labels to a policy. And what we would normally see in the label list to start off with is all of our global labels. And then we can actually make sub-labels particular to this policy to have them nested. And so what this is nice for is, again, the interface, once we see it, you'll see that there's specific reasons why we want to do that. So if I was going to go ahead and add a new label, this would actually be at the top of the hierarchy, but we'll go ahead and keep it as is. I've got a lot of different configuration options here. So I've got a name, of course, and so we'll just go as test in the description, and you'll see where those descriptions and label names show up here momentarily. You'll also choose the color of the label within the actual ribbon and interface. We'll just leave that at black for now. And next is really the two different aspects that we consider around reactive activities that the labels help perform. So the first one is around protection. And so this really focuses on, okay, I have a condition which is going to be met below, or a user has chosen this. What am I going to do based on that? Now, in this case here, as Bob mentioned, we can also have we can use the Azure cloud keys that Microsoft provides for the certificate infrastructure, or we can actually use our own CA as well. So I've just got the Azure cloud key set up in this particular tenant. But you see here, basically, we can, as this label indicates, we could just apply a certain set of permissions based on a predefined template, and we'll see what this looks like here in a few minutes. We could choose specific users, and so if we wanted to choose a marketing group or an HR group, etc., we could do that. We could also expire the content as well, so either by number of days from the time that it's sent or shared, as well as a certain date. So if we know that a project, for example, has a certain end date, we could actually expire that content, and that way we know if the content's gone outside of the network, that regardless of whether it's there or not, once that date hits, that content's going to expire and becomes no longer accessible. We can also allow offline access as well. This is useful for when we think about offline mobile situations. So if I'm somebody that's working, on a project, and I'm at the airport, I get on my plane, and then I happen to download my email, but I don't, or I happen to download the content within OneDrive or the SharePoint app. I can get to that offline without having an internet connection, for example. And I get the number of days there as well.
And by the way, just to add some commentary to that, that really ties to the level of sensitivity of content, right? So you can say, I'll allow that to happen for all kinds of content except for highly confidential, right? And then highly confidential, I will force you to provide me credentials every time you access it, for instance. That you could go that far.
Yep. Absolutely. Good point, Bob. So we'll jump back over to the actual label interface here. So that was talking about the protection. Now we can configure no protection, we can protect, we can remove protection. Obviously those have different use cases for different things. So we're just going to go ahead and leave that blank for now. The second portion of this is actual visual indicators within the document. So in this case, you can see we have three different options here. One is a header, one's a footer, and one's a watermark. I've actually already got a label set up for the watermark, but just to kind of show you what that might look like, we get several different options here. We can choose a specific font size and color, etc., alignment, some pretty nice features there. Watermark, again, still same text color, where we want to put it, etc. So very good stuff. Next is the conditions area. This is the part that's really, really powerful. So while we can allow users to apply labels arbitrarily to content, the biggest thing is we want to make this as easy as possible, as Bob mentioned, right? So the way we can do this is by using automatic conditions to do this. So if you're familiar with what Office 365 historically DLP rules, for example, you're going to see a lot of these same content types that are listed here, right? So we can actually go in, for example, and if we want to type in credit card, there's a predefined credit card content type. We can set the number of occurrences and whether to use unique. There's also health and medical and other privacy information. We can also do custom content types as well with registry regular expressions, which is great. And so what this is powerful is that we can say, if that content type appears, let's say 3 times within an email, for example, we want to automatically apply this label. So if I head back to my policy, we'll see if that comes up. refresh this one more time. So if we head back over to the scope policy section and our Project Falcon, we'll see if these labels pop up. And if not, we can jump over to the global and see this as well. Okay, so let's jump over to the global policy and we can see how this is applied. So if we take a look at something like credit card data, for example, if we scroll down to the bottom past the actual conditions, we can see that there's actually two different options here. We can do automatic or recommended. In this case, we've got recommended. It has a little tooltip here to send as well to the user, and then they would get the option to apply that. If we did automatic, when the user, literally as the user puts content into the document or into an Excel spreadsheet or whatever the protection, whatever the content you're trying to protect is, an email even, with the Azure Information Protection client, it will actually go and start in real time analyzing whatever that content is to go ahead and provide a reactive and conditional access to that. So in this case, we've got recommended, but we'll go ahead and see in a demo here momentarily that we've actually got an automatic one. So I'm going to pop over back to my demo machine. And let me just share desktop here. So now I've got just another surface here as well. This is, running a recent build of Windows 10. It is joined to the Azure AD for this Office 365 EMS tenant, and so it does have some nice built-in functionality. I know my screen's still loading here, as it relates to sign in, etc. So as soon as that comes up.
I'm seeing your screen, by the way, Matt.
Okay. I think it's actually just my other machine that's not caught up. Okay, so I've got Office configured on this machine with a demo account here, Ben W. I've got OneDrive, etc., all configured as well. So let's just do the most simplest of demos here as it relates to some of the things we've implemented so far. So we have just to review, we've got the scope policy that applies to the Project Falcon. This user is a group of that, or a member of that group, excuse me. And so we'll see what's going to be applied here. So I've got just some sample DLP data that we typically use to kind of trigger and illustrate what DLP looks like. Using the same content, we can really show what the AIP experience is as well. So there is a AIP plugin that is required for Office. It can be deployed, via however you deploy software, even from a group policy or installed manually. And so that's just available from Microsoft.com, and it's a pretty simple thing to do. But it does need to be deployed on desktops, on Windows 10 machines, as Windows 7 machines. There's also functionality within the iOS and Android mobile apps, so within the Outlook app, as well as Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote, the SharePoint and OneDrive apps as well. And that's constantly evolving too. So there's lots of new things that are joining the fold as it relates to that. So you'll see here when I've launched this, when I've launched Word here, I've got this protection icon in the ribbon here now. And you'll see that my default content sensitivity is set to confidential Project Falcon only. So it knows, because it's gone out and reached out to the AIP service, that I'm a member of Project Falcon, and the most restrictive thing that it's supposed to do right now is apply view-only rights to any new documents I create. So if I hit the edit button here, I can see I get a little interface that gives me all the different labels that I have available in my environment. So you see we've got personal, public, general. We can pop over to confidential, and this is where that label visual would be great. I've got a couple other options here as well. Now, Bob mentioned, we want to try to keep it as simple as possible, right? And so this is just an illustration of getting detailed about the labels is an opposite of that, mainly just to show kind of that we can actually deploy them. So in this case, I'm going to switch it over to co-owner. just so we can have the correct rights here. And what I'm going to do is just paste in that DLP data. And I'm just going to go save the document into OneDrive. Now what you're going to see when I go to save this is a dialog that's going to pop up. And you see it's going to say, okay, I found credit card data. I'm going to recommend that you change it over to that sensitivity. Okay, great, we can do that. So now it's changed here in the sensitivity area. I can also view the permissions that are going to be applied to this document as well. So by default, co-owner is basically, everything but full control, or it is full control, I should say. And so those are the permissions that are automatically applied based on what I've done so far. I can go up to the icon in the ribbon here as well, and I can also see the same interface. Here's the watermark option as well. So instead of protecting the document, if I just wanted to watermark it, I can simply do that. This is the option that we saw earlier about having to provide an explanation as to why we're changing that particular protection level. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit confirm there. And we see that we've got now a watermark across there as well. Again, we can make these automatic as well. I've chosen not to do that. But in this case, we could make the credit card protection automatic or the watermark automatic. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the protection. And let's go ahead and just save this. And let's go ahead and open up the track and revoke interface here. So one of the nice things that Bob had mentioned earlier is that we've got a great interface for actually viewing what's happening with their documents. So this is an end user feature. This is something that they can go in and look at. We're doing a pretty simple demo here, so we're probably not going to see too much data. But what we will see here is kind of what we can eventually see. So we see a list of who may have accessed that document. I haven't shared it yet, so we won't see anything there. We can also see, and this is really great, a map of where the document was accessed from. So we can also see whether it was viewed or denied as well, right? So if we, as Bob mentioned, right, somebody's trying to open a document from Ukraine, and based on some other knowledge that Office 365 has, maybe it might have denied that access based on it coming from a banned IP or an unsecured device or a previously unknown device, or somebody tried to access it without MFA, those kind of things. So if we go back up to our doc up here, again, we see some other docs in here as well. I'll just kind of show you what that looks like. So we can see here, I've got a user that viewed it. I've got another test user here. I can look at the map here. I can see that it was accessed by me as that test user from Washington, D.C. I can also choose whether to be notified as well when that document's accessed and how. So very simply, we've now kind of set basically protection on this document. And again, for right now, we don't, we have not very restrictive protection. Again, if we wanted to go over to highly confidential, we could add additional protection there. We could change this over to confidential view only, for example. So let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to save that one more time. And then I'm going to go ahead and share it. Out to another test user we've got here. So even though I've got set this view only, and I've said this can edit over here, it's really the rights management that takes precedence. It's going to be the most restrictive thing that's there, right? So if I've got different content or different policies that are being applied, it's always the most restrictive. So I'm just going to go ahead and share that. And then head over to my other test account here. So we see we get the normal sharing notification. There's nothing different here. This is an internal sharing link. We can open that up. The one thing you're going to see here was when there's rights protection applied to documents, that rights protection can only be accessed in the Outlook Thick apps on a workstation. That includes a Mac as well. But there's no support yet for the browser-based apps to be able to access that rights management. So in this case here, we see that it wants to edit it in Word. Let's go ahead and do that. Of course, I've already got it open, so let's actually close it and then open it one more time. And the big thing I want to show here is the view only option, right? So that really has taken down the ability for what users can do. So in this case, let's say I was a user and I was trying to be nefarious, and oops, it's actually open as me. Give me just 1 second. So now if we jump over to, Bob, can you make that other account, Alex W, a presenter? Great. So now we're just jump over to one more machine here so we can see what this process looks like for that user. So we can see we've got a email notification, as I mentioned. We can open up that sharing link. Again, we'll get the notification that it has to be edited in Word. And now when I do, I see I've got a couple things here. So on the label itself, on the label itself, I've got my view-only rights. Now, if I go ahead and actually try to, for example, copy content, so I've highlighted it.
So,
here.
Okay, there we go.
Yep.
Interestingly enough, it's black. I think it's blacking out, and it's blacking out because you can't actually present that content if it's protected.
Yeah. Right. Exactly, Bob.
So
you guys can't see the content, but I'm literally highlighting it, I'm trying to open Notepad, copy and pasting it, and it does not work. So we've had some of this functionality available in the mobile apps for about 1.5 years now, using various different application management functionalities within Intune. And now that it's been brought to the thick apps, basically the only way to get that content out of there would be for somebody to take a picture of it with their phone, for example. But they can't take a screen cap of it. Obviously, you guys can't see it on the Skype session as well. So really behaving as we would normally, as we expect it to, which is great. So again, this is kind of a very basic, kind of use case for things. We've kind of taken the content we shouldn't have tried to share out to the outside world, and tried to share it even internally, but due to the restrictions we put in place, obviously that's being blocked. Any questions so far? Great.
Is there anything else you want to demo?
Yeah, so let me just show you one thing. This is a very, very, very new thing. So, of course, we're going to demo it, right? Just this week, so if anybody's familiar with what used to be called Office 365 message encryption, it's still called that. It was a somewhat easy way, but not so easy, to allow end users to trigger encryption on messages. So this was great for having attachments that needed to be encrypted and only viewed through certain interfaces. But the kind of end user experience on the receiving side was not always the best. And so Microsoft finally has announced now that really that's all integrated and streamlined into Azure Rights Management, information protection, excuse me. So I'm in the OA interface here. I should preface, so there is a little bit of setup that has to be done via PowerShell to transition over to the new use case, but it's very, very simple. It takes just about 15 minutes to do, so, and very publicly documented. So I'm in a OA session here, and we see that we've got now a new button across the top there called Protect. So we hit the Protect button. By default, it's just going to go ahead and apply a do not forward option to a message. Now, if you're not familiar with do not forward, this is something that's built into the body of the message. Exchange understands it, as well as other email systems. So not only Exchange, but Gmail and others respect that configuration. And so it's not just an Exchange or Office 365 thing. Where this is great, right, is I can easily set that setting, and without having to put anything in the subject or trigger anything else, I can then push that message out to whoever I want to send it to, and they've got that do not forward option as their default. So no more, kind of, if you've ever done this, encrypt or whatever. If you're using a third-party product, sometimes you've got the add-in, but the add-in doesn't work in OA. So now a lot of that's been eliminated, which is great. Make it a lot more simple. What we can also do, of course, is change those permissions. So we've got just a couple templates here. These are the default templates that exist in Azure Information Protection. So if we were to go back and actually take a look at these, we could actually see what the restrictions are. We could add additional ones as well. So if we wanted to restrict cut, copy, paste, or again, force encryption, or whatever those different interactions might be, we can apply a lot of that same rights management on the email side as well. So that's great. The last thing that I'll mention is not only can we do that with rights management, we can also be reactive just like we were on the documents as well. So I don't have the content up. But we could paste the same credit card content, for example, into a message. And if the message fell into the classification of any of the policies that were already set, we'd then have that, whatever that condition was, right? So if that was to encrypt it, or to block it, or to apply rights management, literally the message would come across as an empty message envelope, basically, and then the actual real message would be attached to it and have rights management built into that message. So a lot of the same things we kind of talked about for documents are really extensible now very, very easily on the email side as well. And I'll just show you one last thing on that as well. So that same interface that we've got within Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote, etc., we also get a similar interface then within Outlook as well. So we could actually have automatic sensitivity classifications based on different criteria. And we can see those different items happening here as well. So really great stuff so far. And at this point, I will turn it back over to Bob.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Let me go ahead and go back to presenting the rest of this. Just give a second for it to load. Whoop. Sorry, we didn't pick up where I wanted to, so just give me a sec. All right. Okay. So just real quick, we usually leave, so what does this mean? So, hey, this is awesome to us. We'd like Planet to come help us get this set up. So we do have an Azure Information Protection Quick Start. We can get you up and running with this in a couple of days, right? This is often leveraged as part of EM plus S quick starts that we do as a component, but it also can be done standalone. We discuss, what your needs are with your key security and compliance stakeholders, build out what this framework looks like, target 2 to 5 of these sort of labels or scenarios so that you can see what it takes to make one, and then sort of teach you how to fish, right? And the idea is that we kind of get in and out for $10,000 fixed fee, and we can get you up and running on this. Feel free to reach out to, your account manager or you already own it alias you already own it at GoPlanet.com. If you have any interest in this, we're happy to help you. Just real quick before we open up to questions, we did have the other day, I think it was October 12th, we had the Office 365 Summit. We had over 120 government customers attended throughout the day. All the videos from the government summit are available on the Planet YouTube site. There's a lot of great sessions there, and we got a lot of great feedback. Obviously, you can't do your own Q&A anymore, but if you watch one of the sessions and you have questions, feel free to send it to the You Already Own It alias. And with that, we are done, and I'll open it up for any questions. Any questions about this topic or others, feel free to unmute and just go ahead and speak up.
Hi, in order to get the protection button, so you need to convert from OEM to the new Azure encryption?
Yeah, I can answer that. So there's a set probably of about 10 or 12 lines of PowerShell that needs to be done. The good part is that if you have any rules already in place for transport rules, for example, if you've been doing that, they're not affected. This simply adds that additional functionality on top of that, and then you can, of course, to communicate the transition of, hey, okay, here's how we might use this going forward for your end users. So it's not really removing any functionality, just adding that nice little protect button.
Okay, good. You already anticipated my next question. Was it because I've already got a transport rule in effect?
So what you'll probably end up doing is you'll probably want to clone that rule or duplicate it or something, and probably have multiple rules to be able to apply different policies based on different things. But certainly your in-place rule would work just as it does today with the bracket encrypt or however you're doing that, and then you can kind of transition over to using the more kind of structured method.
Now the protect button that we're talking about, you showed it in OA, and then I saw. What about the FAT client? How does that show up? Is that a plugin? How does that get put into the Outlook? Is it GPO or what?
That's a great question as well. So that comes down via the RMS service, and so you do have to have the AI Azure Information Protection client installed.
Gotcha.
On the FAT client. Yeah, it basically pulls. There's a big XML file it pulls down that has a bunch of configuration data in it, and it populates that button as well.
Thanks.
Yep.
Now, AIP is not going to function unless it's configured. The policies are configured in Azure. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So by virtue of having an Office 365 G3 subscription, as Bob mentioned, there is a limited subset, and basically it's mostly the same RMS templates that have been available for quite a few years. So the users will see some of those, but beyond the basic functionality, unless you've got the additional P1 or P2 licenses, you'll just get the basic templated functionality.
So in E3 now, the P1 licenses have, so you can manually set all of that, where you need either P2 or the E5 G5 licenses will be if you want to programmatically attack this. If that makes sense. So you'll be able to do the labeling manually just by running PowerShell commands and converting and all of the kind of stuff that you need to do.
And I missed the section in your Azure portal. What subsection were you under for the policy sets?
So you can just go up to the top. There's the search box across the top. You can just type in information protection.
Okay.
Is the quickest way to get there. Yeah.
Great.
And is the way OME is working now is that it doesn't take you to a third part like a cloud solution to go and retrieve the message. It sends you like a one-time passcode. Is that, or am I imagining that? I know that's the way shareable links is going to be working, with OneDrive and SharePoint, but is that the same way it's going to work with OME?
So that's a great question as well. So one of the benefits of moving from the existing OME infrastructure over to the AIP-based one is that since Microsoft is managing those keys centrally for your entire tenant, basically intra-organization, it's seamless for those users. And so it's always been pretty easy, and you're able to remove encryption and other things, but it's really, really seamless, for internal users. For external users, they'll continue to have the option to log in with either a Microsoft account or a MSA account or an organization account if they have a 365 tenant or an Azure AD. One-time passcode is also an option. But the real good thing is that same stripping of encryption can also be applied on that sense as well. So basically, if I'm an Office 365 customer and I send you a message and you're an Office 365 customer, we can use a transport rule to tell it to strip that out. And so for the end users, it's very, very easy to do, from that perspective. One less kind of save the attachment, open the link, blah, 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 blah. It makes it a lot more seamless. And that functionality is also either due to be released or has been released in the Outlook mobile app as well. So making some great strides on that front as well. Because I know it was always kind of a pain. You had to use the OME app if you wanted to view encrypted messages on your phone. So a lot of that's being integrated with that central key store now, which is great.
Any other questions? The good ones today. Thanks, guys, for bringing good questions. Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, I'm going to say that's it for questions. If you have, if anybody's shy and wants to follow up with additional questions later, feel free to send it to the You Already Own It alias. Thanks, everyone, for attending. I think this was a great session. Feel free to reach out to us, again, if you have any further questions. And with that, we'll shut her down for the day. Thanks a lot.